Testing, 1, 2, testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing.
It's not even on. But now we're going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order at this time. We will start with any acknowledgements.
Good afternoon. So we are here today to acknowledge that we are recipient third year in a row for the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association Award for the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. It's a mouthful, but the program started with GFOA in 1945. We decided to apply for that and go through the extensive checklist that's required, which includes going back and calculating and coming up with 10 years of statistical data. We never had that in our normal financial audit, but that was required as a part of this award program. So in March of 22, a year ago, we submitted our report from last year's audit to the GFOA. It goes through a pretty rigorous review program, and then we have been told and we have been informed that we were accepted, or we received that award again this year. So at this time, I would like to call Lynn up, Delatorre, and present her with the plaque, Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting, presented to the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County for its annual comprehensive financial report for the year ended September 30, 2021.
Thank you.
And thank you for... There's a lot of hard work that goes in there behind the scenes, and we'll hear a little bit about that from our auditors, which is the next item on the agenda. So today, we do not have quorum, so we will go ahead and hear the presentation from the auditors. We will not have a formal recommendation. However, they will be back at the March board meeting where they would give a similar presentation, and then we can accept the audit at that time. So at this time, I would like to call up the audit partner, Lauren Strope, to give us our good words of.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here with all of you today. My name is Lauren Strope, and I had the pleasure of serving as the audit partner. I did not have the pleasure this morning of waking up with a cold, so I apologize for that, but I have my manager here with me, Dewana Coleman, who will help us kind of go through the results. Can you click it? Thank you so much. This is our client service team, so it's not just Dewana and I. There's a whole ton of people that work on completing this audit. And as Laura mentioned, it's not just an audit of the financial statements, but really an audit of the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. We'll kind of go in a few minutes what we do with the different pieces there. But this is your client service team, and all of us were very happy to be on the team this year. I did want to mention that Scott Anderson, our second review partner, he actually did a rotation with GASB for 2 years, so he was actually part of writing some of the guidance that we now follow. So it really gives us a lot of insight and a really detailed review of the report.
Yeah, I was just going to add, that explains all the comments that I got from him when he reviewed the audit report.
Yes,
It definitely
yes, very
explains it.
detailed, very detailed. So just our agenda today, we'll walk through the results of the audit. We'll touch base on that GFOA certificate award. We'll go over corrected and uncorrected misstatements. We'll go over the qualitative aspects of accounting practices, our independence considerations, some required communications that was required by our audit standards for us to have with you, those charged with governance, a few other matters, and then we did just want to touch on some report changes that are going to impact your audit next year and the report for next year, just so that you're aware of those and can kind of keep that in mind as you move through the year. So we are really pleased. We are ready to issue our report based on your approval, and we are ready to issue an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. That's the highest level of assurance that we can give you as your external auditors. It's a clean opinion. It's the only type of opinion you really want. We actually follow a few different auditing standards when we complete your audit. The first and foremost is generally accepted auditing standards, which do require us to plan and perform our audit in order to opine on the financial statements at the end. And as I mentioned, we're ready to issue an unmodified opinion. We also follow GAS, or government auditing standards, when we complete your audit. And what that requires us to do is to look at internal controls as it relates to your financial reporting. We don't actually opine on internal control, but if we became aware of a significant deficiency or a material weakness in your internal control during the course of the audit, we would let you know. We're pleased to report that that's planned to be issued as a no comment letter, meaning that there are no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that I need to disclose to you. We also follow Chapter 10.550 Rules of the Auditor General of the State of Florida, which will require us to issue a management letter that will be included in your report. And again, that's a clean or no comment letter. So basically, we were just able to take the template, and that's what provided by the state, and use that. And the last thing the state of Florida does require us to do is an examination of your compliance with investment policy. And again, that's going to be a no comment letter. Again, clean letter and all that you would want. So all around, we are prepared to issue great audit opinions. And I did want to touch base. Laura kind of stole my thunder there, but you guys did receive that for 3 years in a row. Fantastic. And really what that does, and Laura kind of mentioned, is before you just had that financial section. And that is what our basic audit opinion covers. What the GFOA requires really is that introductory section and that statistical section, and that's that 10 years of data that Laura was talking about. A lot of that is non-financial in nature, and so what we do is an in relation to opinion on a lot of it, meaning if it's supposed to tie back to the audited financials, we ensure that it does, and we also ensure that all of the pieces that are required by the GFOA are present in the report. So again, very pleased to report that that's being submitted again. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Dewana to kind of go through the rest so I can save my voice and answer any questions that you might have at the end.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. As part of our audit, of course, we look to see if there's any journal entries that we had to make. We had no journal entries this year, which means that management was able to provide the financial statements and the trial balance, and part of our audit testing that there were no entries that we had to recommend to management to be posted. So we have no corrected misstatements or no adjusting journal entries to be posted to the financial statements. And as part of that, we might have uncorrected misstatements. These are journal entries that might have arisen that we would send over to the team and say, do you want to post this entry? And we can choose to post the entry or not. In this case, we had note of those entries as well. There are no corrected or uncorrected misstatements. Laura and her team always do a wonderful job, so we have nothing to report there this year. As part of our audit, we look at the qualitative aspects of accounting. We look to see if there's any change in policies, and one of the things you will see is that we adapted a GASB standard number 87 this year, which just changed how we account for leases. As JWB had no leases that were material and fell under, that were material to the financial statements, you won't see any changes as far as your basic financial statements. You won't see a deferred inflows or lease receivable, anything of that nature. But what you will see in your financial statements in the notes section is some lease footnotes just explaining that we adopted GASB 87 during the year, and that if you ever get a lease that is material to the financial statements, we'll be reporting it a little bit differently than we did in the past. So if you're not familiar with GASB 87, it just made operating leases go away. They're no longer a thing. They're a thing of the past. Everything is kind of treated like a capital lease, treated a little bit different. So like I said, nothing to report this year as far as leases are concerned, but if we ever enter into a material lease, then we will have to report that a little bit different going forward. And as still part of the financial statements, we look to see if there's any new related party transactions, anything that we weren't aware of, anything that we need to disclose. We want to make sure that your financial statements report any related party transactions. We found no new related parties and no undue relationships with those related parties that were already there. Everything is similar to last year as far as any kind of related party transactions. We always look to see if there's any significant or unusual transactions in the financial statements. We have nothing to report this year. I just want to say, just because something is significant or unusual doesn't mean that it's a control issue, or doesn't mean that it's something that's wrong. It's just something that happened this year that isn't necessarily something that happens in your normal course of business. For instance, if you issued debt or did something that was huge, or if you, not that it applies, but a new market tax credit is one I like to throw out there, because it is something that is significant and it is unusual, but it is not something that is a control deficiency or not anything that's wrong. But if we had something that was significant or unusual, we would list it here and bring it to your attention just so that you can know this is something that happened. But like I said, nothing to report, nothing significant or unusual in the financial statements. And of course, as part of our financial statement audit, we always look to see management's estimates to see if they're reasonable. So we, of course, look for the estimate for allowance for a doubtful account, based on management's historical knowledge and estimate to see if that's reasonable. We look at the useful lives of property, plant, and equipment, just, maybe make sure we're not amortizing computers over 40 years like a building, just for reasonableness overall. Of course, the OPEB liability, estimate of pension costs, but we're always looking in our financials as we do our audit to look at any estimates given to us by management to make sure that we are comfortable with the basis of those estimates.
And real quick, just to touch on the OPEB liability, because you'll notice it's not in your report. There was an OPEB actuarial report that was done several years ago that had a liability of less than $3,000. And so while it still is an estimate and still something that we talk to management about each year, you won't see the 5 pages of OPEB disclosure in the report because it's immaterial to your financials as a whole. So I just wanted to mention that when you were walking through it.
Thank you. And then just want to let you know, in your financial statements as you go through and the notes, your significant accounting policies are going to be in note 2. So that's going to outline the treatment, how management treats, all of our line items on our balance sheet and our income statement as far as how the treatment for those financial statement line items. And every year we have some independence considerations. Of course, we do some non-attest services, so we help provide assistance with software selection. And we always make sure that we are independent of the organization. We are independent of JWB. We have no undue relationships, nothing to report. We are independent of JWB. Just some other required communications that we have to present. There was no difficulties encountered, no disagreements with management. We noted no matters where we had to have outside consultations. Of course, once we get the management representation dated, we'll go ahead and issue the financial statements. There was no findings and issues, of course, no frauds and illegal acts. Of course, if there was anything that was fraud or something that we needed to report to the board, this, of course, would not be the first time you have heard about it. It would be something that we have communicated during the parts of the audit, and this would be just a reiteration of things that you're always familiar with. Like, we never will tell you something here for the first time. This will always be a reiteration of things you're aware of. Of course, JWB is not a going concern. We see no reason to label it as such. And then some other matters. With respect to the required supplementary information and supplementary information accompanying the financial statements, we made certain inquiries of management just to make sure that information, that we were comfortable with that information. We tied it out, agreed it to the financial statements if it was something that would tie it back to our report. We were comfortable with the supplementary information. And our financial statements, of course, are included in your annual report. And we, of course, review the annual report, and we're comfortable with everything that was in our annual report for the year. Okay, it's fun things. Everyone excited about upcoming financial reporting changes. Of course, we made it through GASB 87, and we thought we were having a break, but GASB says no. So we have some, of course, upcoming accounting pronouncements that will impact or potentially impact the financial statements. We have GASB 94, public-private partnerships and availability payment arrangements, GASB 96, subscriptions-based information technology arrangements, and GASB 96 is kind of like GASB 87, but it's going to be all of those more technology-based things, so Adobe type of agreements, any kind of subscription, things like that. Those will be things that we need to consider as far as, do they fall under the scope of 96? Are they material to the financial statement? So it'll be kind of the process of 87, but for subscription-based technology things instead of traditional leases. Of course, I have GASB 100 accounting changes and corrections, changes and error corrections, and GASB 101 compensated absences. So we have a couple of things coming through the pipeline, some things that will have more of an impact on the financial statements, potentially some things that maybe not have not have an impact, but it just really depends on what the organization has as we come up closer to those standards. Awesome. And are there any questions about the financial statements or the presentation or anything of that nature?
Job well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for your time. We serve at your pleasure, not just when we're doing the audit, but year-round. Our contact information is in the back, so if a question comes up as you're reviewing the report or preparing for the board meeting, please don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you for your time.
Next, we have our discussion where we'll start with our monthly financial and investment reports.
Thank you, yes. And I also wanted to thank the auditors for doing a great job. They were very timely with providing us the information that we needed, the requests. They were very responsive to the inquiries that we had, and as a result, I think it was a great team effort on both parts. As a former auditor, I know that it's important to be responsive to your clients, but sometimes schedules change and so forth, but that's not the case here. We're treated like we're an A client, so I really do appreciate that. And just one other comment, when you were going over the upcoming GASBs, I just had to chuckle because this will tell my age, but I served on the GASB 14 role when I was a young auditor, and now we're up to GASB 101. So before you have the financial statements and investment report for the month of December. Just want to go through a few things with you at this time. So on this statement of the combined balance sheet, and just looking at the comparison with the prior year, you see that cash and investments have increased about $12.7 million. And then looking in your liability section, we've got deferred inflows of resources, so that's increased from 172 to 2.4 million. And I know the auditors didn't touch on this, but one of the adjustments that was made as a result of the pension numbers that came from the Florida retirement system was a $2.5 million adjustment to our liability. And a year ago, we booked a $2.5 million net pension asset because we had done so well in the markets, and now we had to book a $2.5 million reduction, so we're kind of like back in the same boat. But you'll see those fluctuations on the financials as those get booked accordingly. In looking at the income statement, or otherwise known as the Statement of Revenue and Expenditures, I just wanted to point out that this is our quarter one, so it's for the 3 months ended December 31. Couple things I just wanted to point out is remind you that our fiscal 23 budget, which is the first column on the far left, we are showing and we are budgeting that we are going to dip into our fund balance to the tune of about $20.5 million. So we are aggressively budgeting using those resources. Now, whether or not we use them all is another question. We may have lapse and we may have, programs that just don't spend the money that we have allocated. But the goal was in our budget to be very aggressive and try to get those funds out. And looking at the year-to-date actual expenditures, and again, this is 3 months, but I have to remind you that it's really 2 months of expense reimbursements because the agencies are a month behind when they submit their reimbursements to us. They have to wait to the end of the month, and then they submit, and then we remit funds. But in looking at that, total expenditures year-to-date, again, through December 31, was $12.9 million versus $12.0 million a year ago. So we've spent a little bit more than we had in looking at prior years. The other information in your packet gives you some budget and actual analysis, as well as some contracts that were signed and approved. And then the last page is your investment report. So we have $117 million under investments. And if you recall, a year ago, we added a third group to our pool that we could invest in, so we could allocate those funds accordingly. So as of the end of December 31, we had about 89% of our total cash and investments in those pools, which since we changed our policy to read that we could invest up to 100%, and we're not in non-compliance with that. But this shows you the breakdown of the different pools that are being invested in. Also, we've done extremely well relative to earnings. We're well over budget for our annual budget with the earnings that we've already made to date. So at that time, I'll ask for any questions on the monthly statements. No questions. All right, the next item is the fiscal 23 to 28 budget forecast, the key assumptions, as well as the budget calendar. And so I wanted to just walk through some of the assumptions that we're making at this point in time. This is very preliminary, as you could see from the calendar. This is a very lengthy process. And some of my staff are just chuckling. It's like, didn't we just get through approving this budget? Or why are we doing this so early? But that's the way it has to work. So we're here today to talk with you about the key assumptions that we're making. And the first one has to do with the property values. So the county has not issued what their forecast amounts are. Normally, we would have had something by now, but we're told that we'll get that sometime in March. So having said that, all we had was what they had projected a year ago, back in June, as what they had forecasted fiscal 24 to be, and they had estimated that to be 5.4%, and we just didn't think that that was an accurate projection a year out. So we've used an 8% property value increase, but we'll be curious to see, and we'll be monitoring what the county comes out with next month. As far as the millage rate, this is to remind you that a year ago, we did reduce the millage rate from 0.8981 to 0.8508, and we are maintaining that reduced millage rate for another year with the anticipation of possibly having to move it back up. But at this point, looking at the forecast, we're using the 0.8508. One of the other assumptions that comes into play is the cost of living adjustments for staff. Historically, dating back to fiscal year 14 through 22, the board had approved annual increases of 3%. Last year, to keep in line with the local consumer price indexes, there was a 10.2% COLA that was provided to all of the staff. This time, going forward, we are forecasting a 6% COLA. That is below the current local CPI, which is at 9.6%. But again, that's another number that we're monitoring to try to determine where it might fall. But right now, we think 6 would be a reasonable percentage to use in our projections at this point. While we see some other agencies and other technology companies scaling back their staffing and getting rid of staff, we are moving in the other direction. So we have aggressively budgeted to spend our surplus. We added 12 new programs at the last board meeting. We've expanded several of the programs with workforce stabilization. And at the current time, at this forecast, we're looking at adding an additional 6 full-time equivalents to cover the needs throughout the organization. We're not sure at this point yet where exactly those staff positions may be put. They could be in administration or program evaluation. For example, in the program finance department, I have 5 financial analysts, and we have 100 programs. So each one has 20 programs that they are monitoring and doing the reimbursements and looking at the budgets and so forth. But we're not sure yet exactly where these 6 may fall out. We might need someone in the IT division, or could be in, like I said, evaluators or analysts. But at this time, we factored in 6 FTEs, or full-time equivalents, to the tune of $600,000. And then we calculated what our administrative rate would be to make sure we fell within our guidelines, which was 10%. And we fall within that at, I believe it's 8.29%. So we fall within that guideline. The next item in our forecast would have to do with the program cost of living adjustments. So we spoke earlier about the staff COLAs, and now these are the program COLAs. So we allocate funds to all our agencies, and historically, we've always looked at the lapse, and we've used lapse as a guideline to determine if you're going to get an increase in your funding. And last year and the year before, we kind of deviated from that policy because we felt like COVID was such an impact on so many of our agencies that they just couldn't spend the funds, whether it was because participant expenses couldn't be approved for field trips and so forth. Staffing was an issue. People weren't coming back to work. People weren't working. And so as a result, we provided workforce stabilization funds to a lot of these agencies to kind of help with their staffing and their positions and their retention and their recruitment. So having said that, we've looked at this year what would be the appropriate COLA for the allocation for all the agencies. And we've come up at this point in time in our forecast of a blended percentage of 4.2%. So that would be a 3% increase for personnel costs, because we've already given them a lot of workforce stabilization money, and then a 7% increase on their operating costs. We're seeing a lot of organizations are having increase in rents and insurance, utilities. We're seeing all of these areas, operating expenses, increasing, and so right now we've factored in a 7% increase for the operating expenses. Like I said, offset with the personnel costs. And if you look at any one given agency that we provide allocations to, the majority of the funds are for salaries and benefits. Probably 80% of the allocation is for salary and benefits, and the rest is for operating expenses. I spoke a little bit about workforce stabilization, and as you're aware, we've just kind of kicked that in. We gave some of those fundings out in last fiscal year. We've spent some this year, and we've got a couple more to provide. Having said that, we are asking for the agencies to provide us quarterly updates on how they're utilizing those funds, if it's working, are they getting more staff at the higher rate, if that's what they chose to increase a position, or are they doing retention efforts, what are they doing? We figured in a 2-year period, we'll have the chance to really determine if this is working, if that's the right word. And so in our forecast, we have not made any adjustments for workforce stabilization, but in fiscal year 25, another year out, we anticipate we would probably need to right-size some of these allocated amounts, whether it's for workforce stabilization related or just for allocated dollars. So in that case, we have budgeted or forecasted a reduction of about $2 million from those programs. And then going forward beyond that, it would just be about a $500,000 reduction. And we feel that that would be right-sizing the programs. We continue to look at programs that may not be functioning or operating and meeting the benchmarks that we have provided, and we will continue to end those programs if need be, but right now we're trying to look at what the impact might be in fiscal '25. In future programming, of course, we're not spending nearly as much as we had budgeted in previous years because we've accomplished that with the 2 RFPs that we recently sent out. And so looking at future programming for the next 5 years, we are projecting that we would spend between fiscal '24 and fiscal '28 about $6.75 million. And in previous years, we had budgeted that amount in one given year. But in this case, this is what we're anticipating over a period of years. So for fiscal year '24, we are forecasting about $825,000 for future programming. Those would be for things that we've already been looking at, maybe expanding programs, or for example, the Fatherhood Initiative or some of these other areas that we already are working on. So we've carved out $825,000 for those right now in the future programming category, so to speak. The projected lapse is another number that impacts our discussion here and our forecast. And the auditors did not mention this, but in fiscal '22, our lapse percentage decreased the first time since fiscal '17. So what that means is the money that we've allocated or the funds that we've provided to our agencies and internally with our budget, we didn't spend a lower amount than has been in the prior years. So our lapse percentage for fiscal '22 was 19.1%. Prior to that, it has been extremely higher, and there is a chart in your handout where you can see the history. So in fiscal '21, our lapse was at 21.2%. It had been rising steadily since fiscal '17. We came in at the end of the audit at 19.12, and we are projecting for fiscal '23, the year that we're in, to finish the year out at about 16% lapse, which is another decrease. And then we would like to see the lapse kind of tail out, if you would. So the chart here is showing that we were hoped that we'd be at 13.5 and then 12.5, 11, and then 10. We would like to get it down to 10, and hopefully by then, all these hurdles that the agencies have relative to trying to spend these monies will have been accomplished. The last item is spending down the unassigned fund balance. So as I mentioned earlier, in looking at the current financial statements, we had aggressively budgeted to spend down our reserves. And in factoring all of these assumptions that I've just identified, when you look at your forecast, you want to look at that forecasted fiscal '28 number and what the unassigned fund balance percentage is. So our policy is to have a 2-month reserve for our funds, which is a 2-month of expenditure reserves. And then on top of that, we have a 1-month reserve target of 8.3%. And using all of these forecasts and assumptions that I've just identified, that would bring us at 8.67, which is over the 8.33 target amount. So I feel comfortable with that, but I'd have to say at this point in time, there's still so many moving parts. We just had to start somewhere, and we had to identify these key areas: property values, COLAs, workforce stabilization. And so our goal is to continue to spend that down. We heard you loud and clear in the last year. And then the last item in your packet is the budget calendar. And as I indicated, some people are like, are you kidding? This is February. But this highlights for everybody within the organization, identifies when we come to the Finance Committee, for what purpose, when we go to the board. And for example, the personnel starts looking at their budgets internally, the JWB staffing budgets in March. April, we start looking at contingencies, the capital RFA. We address COLA assumptions again. We come back to the Finance Committee in April, and we'll do a five-year forecast, and we'll look at the funding parameters again. In May is when we notify all of our agencies what their allocation amount will be, so they can start working on their budgets, which they will have to submit to us sometime in June. June is a key number because we get the property appraiser values in June, June 1st, and then we can start to calculate what those numbers would be. We have a board meeting in June where we talk about the proposed budget and the revised five-year forecast, and then we come back to the Finance Committee in June to talk about the millage rate. So we'll be addressing the millage rate, looking at the five-year forecast. Hopefully, we will have narrowed down many of these areas. Then in July, the property appraiser will certify the taxable value, so we'll have a pretty hard closed number. And then in July, at the board meeting, we will adopt the proposed millage rate and the proposed budget. And then, of course, one more time in August, we come back here to the Finance Committee to see if there's any changes that need to be approved or discussed before we bring it to the board in September. And so it's a long, drawn-out process. Diana and her department does a great job staying on top of these deadlines and reminding people when we have to have things in. But going back to the forecast and assumptions, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments. Thank you.
Any questions or comments at this time?
You mentioned the number of programs that are per financial person. What's a realistic number? You said 20 is, and it sounded like you were saying that's pretty high. What is a realistic number?
That's a good question, and I don't have my program finance manager in the room, but I know that with all the new programs that were being awarded, I could sense and we could feel the stress of some of those, like, oh, I'm going to get three more programs. So what's the magic number? I think that's hard to say, even because some programs are much more complex than others. So it's difficult to say, you know, you're going to have 20, but you're going to get all the A ones as opposed to the C ones. Those that require more hand-holding, let's just put it that way. So that's a good question. I don't know that I could properly answer that.
Since Beth is not here, I assume we're not going to have a Chief Administrative Officer's report?
We'll have
Or Linda?
Linda.
Linda, all right.
Good afternoon. It'll be quick. Just a few things I wanted to share. You may or may not have heard this week that the Florida Department of Children and Families has announced their plan to take over child protective investigative duties from 7 local sheriff's offices, including those in Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas. DCF Secretary Siobhan Harris recently sent letters to these sheriff's offices citing an evolving child welfare system as necessitating the change. Over the coming months, DCF will work with the Florida legislature to formulate a plan that ensures as smooth a transition as possible, including opportunities for CPI staff to transition to DCF to ensure continuity of services. Since the late 1990s, Child Protective Services have been overseen by sheriff's offices in 7 Florida counties: Broward, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pasco, Pinellas, Seminole, and Walton. Each maintains their own child protective division, staffed with civilian investigators to investigate cases of child abuse or neglect. The initial plan was to expand statewide. However, as it stands, Florida's child welfare investigative services are bifurcated. In some counties, they're operated by the sheriff's office, and in some counties by DCF. Our own Pinellas Sheriff, Bob Gualtieri, was recently quoted as saying, "What was the right thing and a good thing 25 years ago is not the best model for effective child welfare in Florida in 2023. It really is a state responsibility, not a local level responsibility, and it just makes good sense." Our sheriff also noted that having one entity in charge of all child welfare investigations can help with the sharing of resources and personnel across the state. If there is a shortage of investigators in one county, personnel can be moved there from another part of the state. On Tuesday, this topic was discussed at the Pinellas Community Alliance meeting, and it was stressed that it was not a matter of performance. And that is as far as we know. So more to come when we have more information. And certainly our staff participate in the Community Alliance, and we'll stay abreast of it. A call for nominations for the 2023 Dillinger McCabe Putting Children First Leadership Award is underway. We have steadily been receiving nominations, and the deadline to submit is this coming Monday, February 27th at 5 p.m. As a reminder, the award will be presented to an individual who has consistently demonstrated leadership, excellence, advocacy, dedication, and determination in improving the lives of Pinellas County children and their families. The selection committee will review and rank nominations individually, then meet on March 6th here in this room to share their rankings and select a top recipient. All nominees will be invited to attend the annual Kids First Awards Luncheon on April 28th, where the top award recipient will be named at the close of the event. So we're looking forward to that. And then finally, with 75 years behind us, it was the perfect time to lean on our leadership from the past and gather our former board members together for JWB's inaugural Legacy Leadership Circle event on February 10th. While Beth is going to share more about this during her March board CEO report, I just wanted to thank Mike for welcoming our guests and the JWB staff who shared the work and accomplishments of today's JWB. At our March board meeting, we'll share more details on the purpose of the gathering, those in attendance, and future engagement of our Legacy Leadership Circle, along with some fabulous photos commemorating the event. So look forward to that at the March board meeting.
If I can just add a little bit to that. What really impressed me about the meeting and the discussion was the enthusiasm of the players. They came back, they wanted to be part of it, they saw their name on the board, and they had some great ideas, which was really, really interesting to hear. Some of them were 20-plus years away from the board itself, but they never really lost contact, and they never really lost the focus and connection. So that was, to me, it was very impressive with the group that was here. And it'll be interesting to hear what other tidbits that they'll be able to provide us going forward. But every one of them that participated wanted to know when the next meeting was going to be. So.
Now we're at open agenda. Do we have any public comments? No cards. Nothing? Okay. At this time, I'll move to adjourn.
Just one last thing again, congratulations on the award. 3 years in sports makes you into the legendary period. So you do 4, now you'll become the GOAT of the thing. So.
Next year, there'll be the GOAT.
That's right.